It was as if all time had stopped.
I stood there, watching everything move at a fraction of normal speed.
As if someone had casted the slow time spell.
Half-blurry memories always seem to pop into my head about that moment. The spilled ale of a dwarven fellow, the liquid suspended in air, as his comrade had slapped him on the back in greeting, spilling his ale out of his half-full mug. The contorted faces of 3 halflings as they
laughed in earnest at something unknown to me,
and the sly look of an elven gambler from a table off to my right.
His visage rotating like some slowed-down painting as he turned his head.
The barmaid, tripping over some poor chap's foot, and the human adventurer, with an expression of surprise, mixed with the suspended liquid of a frothing mug of Sembian swill, just beginning to slap against his skin, as the remaining liquid floated slowly towards his face. And then there was OWLIE, her mossy green eyes,
looking forward and slightly upwards, towards me,
catching me in the act of staring at her with my mouth agape, the green flecks within those eyes,
glimmering and shining with the light from the nearby sconces as the shadows danced behind.
Her leg,
from the leather boot, hugging her calf and shin, up the leather laces, ending at a point just below her knee, bent as she touched down on the stair in front of her, then up her leg to her perfectly shaped hips, her leg muscles visible through the skin-tight leggings
of black cloth of the finest make, and a slight, time-lapse jiggle
of her thigh as the vibration of her step sent a wave up through her, her slim
and wonderful waistline, covered by their leather travel skirts and belt, a slim dagger sheathed across the small of her back, then up again,
moving over her toned midriff, which I imagined I could see right through to the hardened and unbelievably perfect muscles of her stomach, and then moving up some more, over her leather armor,
which was very well kept and of the best quality,
yet still managed to somehow accentuate her form, to her breasts underneath,
which I couldn't help but envision in my mind, the perfectly sized and shaped,
firm and lithe, the most alluring imagery I have ever had the pleasure to view,
even if it was in my own imagination.
And then again, further upwards, to the nape of her neck, passing over her collarbone, which was, for me,
her most alluring part.
I loved that area of a woman,
and hers was like sculpted art,
and her skin like soft milk,
not a single flaw upon her visage.
And oh, what a beautiful face, that milky skin toned at just the right hue, her pink lips, the perfect shape, her bottom lip plump to the most ideal degree. It looked as if her mouth was made for kissing, and I caught myself sucking on that bottom lip in my mind's eye,
savoring the taste of lavender and sugar,
for that is what they must have tasted like.
It was I who was the mage, but this woman was the one casting spells.
And that is the only way I can describe, my dear readers,
just how beautiful OWLIE Duresti was. I snapped myself from my reverie, realizing I still had the dice in my hands. God only knew how long I'd been standing there, walking.
I shook my head free of the spell,
and with one last thought of the taste on her lips, I rolled.
The rain had all but stopped. By the time we reached the Black Stag, we had made it out of the mansion easily enough, after all. Having found one another in that hidden series of back rooms, the Hewlern must have had design for his playthings, for there were women's garments in almost every wardrobe. Just before I had found Denner, I'd run into one of the Hewlern's guards, but I made pretty short work of laying him down for a dirt nap. Then, when Denner and I reunited, we made a good run of the place, stealing quite a few very fine items. We had to leave the box with the orb, of course, but I filled Denner in on the particulars, en route to Alivard's. Once we walked through the warded doorway, I felt much better about everything, though I still had my head on a swivel, and felt rather paranoid despite it. Alivard had been a most welcoming host. The halfling tailor was all smiles and politeness, and one could tell it was genuine. I rather liked him. He'd allowed us the pick of any garments we needed, to make certain we had changed out of our stealthy garb, just in case someone had seen us. and we hadn't noticed it. We then ate some very good stew, slept for a number of hours for rest, and then woke to the light of the midday suns shining in through the slatted window of Aluvard's little back room. I woke to Denner sleeping beside me, one arm draped over my thigh, his hand cradling the inner part of my knee. I didn't mind at all. After awakening, we ate a quick breakfast of eggs and fried spuds, Aluvard's favorite, and then we made our way directly to the Black Stag, the misty streets of Selgaunt fully bright with the near to midday suns. We'd left the manse just before the 4th hour, so morning was beginning to blend into the midday as we left Aluvard's. The door to the stag swung open suddenly as we approached, but nobody came out, and I attributed it to a breeze moving through, as it was still windy, even though the rain had stopped and suns were out. I gave Denner a potion I'd been saving for a situation like this, where we were entering a known hotbed of trouble and violence, and also drank one of my own, immediately feeling the pleasant effects of the magical enhancements to my dexterity and awareness. Denner made an expression like the potion was the most foul and putrid draught he'd tasted in his life, and said,
"Oh good gods, damn it, woman, this tastes disgusting. What in bang's ass is this shite?"
It increases your awareness of things around you by sharpening all senses, and also allows you to be increasingly proactive and semi-precognitive when it comes to attacks done upon you.
Oh yes, I can feel it now. How interesting. Though it is surely the most disgusting thing I've tasted in recent years.
I laughed lightly at his boyish charm. He could be so, for lack of a better word, cute. And we then proceeded inside, checking our weapons. Aside from a set of 3 throwing knives, I kept hidden in the small of my back with a decidedly grumpy half-orc bouncer who was waiting just inside the door, grunting at the patrons and confiscating weapons as they came in. Denner was almost comical then, as he was made to check a ridiculous amount of weaponry, seeming to have a new blade or other sharp tool of pain or death in every fold of his cloak and every pocket and pouch on his person. It took over a minute for him to hand over everything, and I was still sure he'd kept a few hidden ones as well. I was continually amused by Denner's almost childish ways. Like a little boy, he could be so disarmingly attractive, and also, at times, just aloof to certain ways of the world, happy to be ignorant of the things he didn't care to feel or experience. Half the time he didn't even know he was doing that, which only added to the overall adorability of his personality. And then, he was also very serious, and I'd even go so far as to say, Denner was stoic in most of his dealings, and had a no-nonsense attitude when it came to work, study, planning, and survival. In spite of this, however, his boyish charms would always find a way to come through, creating his youthful persona and making him very attractive to me, and I'm sure any number of other women of all kinds. We made our way up the short stairs to the main floor of the tavern, scanning the scene for the wizard bear. I spotted him immediately, of course, for he was staring right at me, with a perplexed expression on his visage, but very quickly it dissolved into one of friendly familiarity, and he raised a hand slowly, as was his custom in greeting. I nodded, short and slight, as was mine. I then felt Denner's hand on my waist. His gentle yet firm touch was welcome, and I had a fleeting memory of how he'd helped me to my feet after he saved my life. It was at that moment I knew I was beginning to fall for him completely. He leaned in and spoke into my ear softly.
"You go on over. I'll get us a couple of drinks. What do you fancy?"
I was never much of a drinker, having never been accustomed to the mind-numbing feeling that most spirits tended to provide. But in a place like the Black Stag, you drank, or you were not welcome, and people would notice it. "I'll have a Sembian swill," I said, smirking over my shoulder at him. He looked mildly surprised that I'd chosen such a foul-tasting and hard-hitting ale, but he simply returned the smirk with one of his own, and moved off without another word. I made my way through the crowd of drinkers, mostly humans, halflings, dwarves, and half-elves. I could feel the eyes on me as I went towards Ver's table, and I could readily see a few of them staring at me, some at my body, some at my face, all of them with a mixture of lust and adoration. I had experienced this all my life, especially in taverns, or other crowded areas, like midday streets when I was out running my personal errands. It was expected, but I never liked it, and made it a habit not to make eye contact with anyone. In general, as I approached the table, the wizard bear was just tossing a set of 3 pyramid-shaped dice down the long oval table, and they rolled clumsily for only a moment before coming to a stop, which incited a gasp from the other players at the table, and Bear's eyes went wide.
He rolled the queen's beard! I've never seen it!
Queen's beard!
Amazing!
Queen's beard! I'm more blessed at now. No doubt.
Yes,
Aha.
indeed
Ha.
she
Well,
has.
what are the odds of that? Timora must be smiling on me.
Barkeep, a round for everyone. On me.
I wasn't familiar with the game of Queen's Beard. Having never been a gambler much myself, I never really valued the concept of money. And to me, gambling was simply a way to waste time. But I didn't have an aversion to it either. I gathered that to get a so-called Queen's Beard, one would have to be very lucky, for the odds were very low. The wizard explained the details as he greeted me with a smile.
Well met, my dear. I'm very happy to see you and dinner have returned.
He said firstly, polite as always.
As you can see, I have just won by rolling a queen's beard, but I do not think that you understand the mathematics and defiance of odds such a roll entails.
You see, OWLIE, to get a queen's beard, one must roll. Firstly, a king's court, which is a 3 on the red die, a 2 on the blue die,
And a 1 on the green die. That does nothing for you, but give you double what you put up for a marker. In this case, I put a 5-star, which as you know is quite a sum. A king's court roll gives you one other bonus, which is another roll. And on that roll,
all your winnings are forfeit should you roll.
anything but all the same number on each die.
So, all 1s, or all 2s, 3s, or 4s.
However,
If one rolls another king's court, then they must roll the 4th die,
which is a 20-sided die.
that usually sits dormant over on that side of the table.
And he then motioned to the far side of the table, where a stoic, grumpy-looking dwarf was seated and was huffing under his breath, narrowing his eyes at the mage.
As you can see, the space marked flutter on the table is empty, for if you look down at the far end,
It sits there, with the 20 side up, and even though our good Master Dwarf, Master Mudhammer, as it were, is unhappy about my roll,
it is on the 20 up nonetheless.
And he then leveled his gaze at the dwarf, his previous good-humored expression immediately gone, replaced by a serious, almost threatening one, and he said, loud enough for those nearby, and all within the area of the gaming table to hear.
That's 20 side up, isn't it?
because if you see that 20 there, and are trying to perhaps make it appear that it is not the case, or are overly unhappy about it being so, then you are more than welcome to incite the official complaint by interjection. But, my friend, you do know and are aware of the consequences of
That interjection being overruled, are you not?
To this, the dwarf said nothing, crossing his arms in front of his chest. He simply glared.
Well, I see. In the case that you are unaware of the rules regarding interjection while playing Queen's Beard, let me make it clear to you, Mr. Mudhammer, so that we remain on the level. When one interjects during a game of Queen's Beard,
Because of its cutthroat nature as a game itself.
and because the other players of the game are responsible for anywhere from 50 to 90% of the winner's payment on most of the high end.
Winning rolls,
The penalty for an interjection,
which is overruled by the house, is immediate loss of all winnings,
to be paid immediately to the house,
aside from the winnings paid to the winner.
including another added sum of half again over.
The initial bet the winner posted before the first roll. And I won't assume to presume that you know what happens if the interjector chooses to refuse.
Or is unable for some reason to pay a failed interjection balance. So I will tell you,
The penalty, my dear dwarf, is permanent expulsion from the establishment.
the only way to countermand that is to pay a fine of 20 fine stars to the Black Stag. For that is the price they've set for those
Who have been banned from entry due to gambling arguments. All that can be avoided, however, by simply paying me the amount I'm due, or
Then Praeus paused, developing a hard, threatening demeanor.
We can take any arguments or issues you might have outside into the street, which would be cheaper for you and more convenient for me, and would save the Black Stag a headache as well.
but will likely result in your untimely death. And then, of course, neither of us would really win, would we?
The dwarf sat there a moment, the glare on his face softening into one of mild frustration. Then, without a word, he reached into his belt pouch and produced his portion of the winnings which were due to Praeus, tossing the coins onto the table. Then he stood, nodded at the others at the table, then to Preyas, even if he was still unhappy about his loss, then turned on a heel to go clomping out the door, not forgetting to take his very finely made axe from the bouncer, who smirked at him with a grunt of approval.
A shame, it is, that Mr. Mudhammer's temper and his obvious nature as a sore loser caused that falling out. I rather liked him, and was seriously debating hiring him as a bodyguard for the coming troubles, which are no doubt going to occur.
I cocked my head, perplexed. What do you mean, Master Vare? I asked.
That we shall discuss in a more private setting. Come, let's move to a more secluded area. Ah, we'd better wait for your comrade to hurry the hells up and walk over here.
And he motioned to Denner, who, with drinks in hand, had taken the time to stop and converse with a very dark and decidedly roguish-looking fellow near the bar. It was just then he glanced at me and met my eyes, then nodded, said something short to the roguish man, and made his way over to us. We then, after Master Vare said his farewells to the other players at the table, moved to a dimly lit, out-of-the-way area in the rear of the stag. The halfling fellow that was playing next to Vare was scooped up by the wizard, and accompanied us as well. We all sat around a table in the farthest corner, the only other occupants of the area, a pair of wild elves, who paid us no mind.
Now then,
Said the wizard, after we had all gotten comfortable.
it would appear to me that there was, once again, another failure of the procurement of the orb.
He seemed only mildly disappointed unexpectedly, and I replied, sipping my Sembian swill first, grimacing at its bitter taste. To answer you, Preyas, yes and no, it's not a complete failure. We don't have the orb in our possession, no. However, we know exactly where it is. And I then detailed to him what had happened back at the Hewlands mansion, from the strange room, with all the magically enchanted items and the book, and the box. And it was then Denner chimed in with a new bit of information of his own.
I've just learned something that may be very important regarding the box you speak of. My friend, the man I was speaking with by the bar, he told me something strange. He and I go way back, you see, back to my days running with the Dusk Knives when I was younger. He told me there was a rumor that a drow woman, who was seen with the Hewland last night at the ball, briefly, had a box like the one you described. He knows this because a couple of his runners were there, stealing jewelry and such from the rich fops disguised as servant folk. One of his runners saw the box and made a note of it, because it was in the possession of the Drowess, who used the Hewlands policy of allowing all races to enter the city gates during the ball. Evidently, the Hewland was infatuated with the Drowess, for she is rumoured to be very beautiful. If you can call one of them dark-skinned outcasts that was all the information he had. But I thought perhaps it might be good to know of the drow involvement.
This is very disturbing news.
Said the wizard, furrowing his brow. He was silent a few moments. Then, after taking a deep breath, he said,
Let's focus on the most important things first.
1. The box you tell me about, OWLIE. It is likely warded with death magic,
And was more than likely the cause of your sickly and dizzy feeling when you entered the room. The book, I believe, may have contributed to that, but it's more than likely not the cause. Based on the description of the runes and writing in the book and on the floors, I am surmising that the script was infernal, written by a tiefling mage, most likely,
which means that they have eyes on that room, and we better add the infernal beings to the list of involved parties.
Just what they are involved for is anyone's guess. However, I would place a heavy wager on the fact that the Hewland is intertwined with infernal wizards. For, if one remembers, he has allowed the Shade Enclave to have their fortress floating above the city for many moons now. Which leads me to another thought. I wonder just how involved those Shades are in this. Either way, no matter, for we can go ahead and say that the Hewland is a fool,
allowing Shades to speak into his ear and occupy the city like some new ruling elite spectres.
So why would he not associate with the Dark Elves and Tieflings?
Mr. Vare, how is it you have come to all that? Based on the smallest bit of information, we can't possibly know any of that for certain.
Said Denner, crossing his arms. The wizard simply lit his pipe, then, puffing a long draw of what smelled like mine dust, inhaling it into his lungs, the acrid and sickly sweet-smelling smoke wafting about.
My dear boy, nothing is certain in this scenario,
Other than the fact that the orb is here,
and if it falls into the hands of pretty much anyone,
it will mean doom for us all.
I felt the need to interject at that point. I said, Master Vare, Preyas, Let's assume that everything you have said so far is the actual case. What then, should we, or could we, do about obtaining the orb? You said it is being watched, and none of us can likely touch the box, much less the orb. How are we supposed to retrieve it? Forget who's involved and why. The important thing is obtaining the orb. Yes?
I appreciate your practicality, OWLIE, my dear.
He said, with a slight smile, puffing his pipe again.
You are more than correct. However,
There are magical ways to circumvent some of the issues you are concerned about. I can ward the two of you with buffering spells, and also render you undetectable by all, aside from the gods themselves.
before you go back to retrieve the orb, as far as the box is concerned,
I have just the tool to dispel the magic upon it, a wand.
and I will give it to you to use.
You must return it to me though, for it is extremely rare. Understand?
Whoa, wait a moment, Master Vare. I have to say, just how the hells are we supposed to get back into the mansion? Without the distractions the Hulin's ball provided. You are telling me you can make it so nobody can see us, hear us, or even magically scry us? How is that possible? I've never heard of any spell that can do that. Not even an improved invisibility spell, like the ones you hear the grand wizards of the Cowl and other mages of legend use.
And he stared at the wizard then, a look of disbelief etched on his visage.
My boy, you seem to forget. I am a wizard, not of any small merit, but rather a Grand Magus of the 17th tier,
A fact you may have forgotten because of my reclusive nature.
and lack of other mages around me to bolster my standing.
Be that as it may, I am indeed a very powerful and skilled weaver of the arcane,
So muchly so,
that I have learnt how to manifest my own spells by design. Spells which are beyond what you may have heard of, seen or known of before.
I can indeed, without overmuch effort,
Cast a spell upon each of you that will render you completely undetectable by sight, by sound, and by magical means, even true sight,
and this can be done along with other enchantments.
which will allow for you to enter the mansion rather easily. The only setback is it will take some time for me to prepare the spells and order the castings in a way where they will be effective.
Also, the length of time the spells will last is an issue. My spell, Unknown Shadow, I call it, only lasts for a period of about half a cycle. This means you will have to be very fast. As far as the box is concerned, the wand will take care of dispelling its enchantments, and the bag and tongs will take care of the orb.
As far as any unforeseen arcane traps or wards, true sight will allow you to perceive them, and you will likely have to use your skills and cunning to handle the rest. I can also cast protective magic on you both, along with some mind enchantments to keep your wits from being befuddled by any form of mind magic.
As there are both drow and mind flayers involved here.
At this point, my mind was swimming with the amount of intricate details this task was presenting. I had never been witness to arcane spellcasting of the caliber Master Vare was describing. I began to wonder just what I'd gotten myself involved in here.
Now, if we're going to accomplish this next attempt,
We are going to have to prepare,
especially me, the spells are going to take no less than a full day to prepare.
so I suggest you to go about doing some preparations of your own.
Get anything done that you need done. And here, take this.
The wizard then stacked a small fortune in gold coins on the table, 3 5 stars, and some Chimerian coins that were beautiful, yet not quite the value of the Sembian ones. It was enough to live like royalty for a week at least. I nodded, smiling, and Denner smiled broadly himself. I took a 5-star and handed the rest to Denner,
Come, let's get to it.
and he stood, glancing down at the halfling, who had been sitting there, wide-eyed and mouth agape, listening to our conversation with pure concentration.
And you, my good little man, come with me. I have some things to discuss with you while we walk.
And they were off, strolling out the tavern without a glance behind. I looked at Denner, and he looked back at me, and both of us nodded, for we read one another's minds. The merchants? I asked, knowing I didn't even have to. Without a word, Denner smiled and stood, offering me his arm, which I took, and we together left the stag and made our way to the merchant district. Had we been more aware of our surroundings, we would possibly, though unlikely, have seen the shadow, which was just a shade darker than the others nearby, far off in the corner of the room, and from within it, 2 lavender eyes gleaming through, watching us, and they narrowed as we left. A malevolent gaze it was, like a predatory stalker, murderous and dark. Then they faded into shadow, and were there no more.